The final moments of human presence in the Orion arm came not with a whimper, but with a symphony of desperate innovation. Captain Elena Reyes stood on the bridge of the RK-9, her fingers tracing the holographic displays that showed the systematic dismantling of human civilization. The Galactic Concordance, a coalition of 11 advanced alien species, had been planning this moment for decades. What humans had perceived as diplomatic tensions and political maneuvering was, in reality, a meticulously crafted plan of total extermination. The attack began with surgical precision. Quantum disruption fields neutralized human defense networks in milliseconds. Entire planetary defense systems collapsed like paper structures, their complex AI networks shredded by technologies so advanced they seemed like magic. Luna Base, Earth's primary extra-atmospheric defense hub, was the first to fall. Rise watched in horror as the massive orbital platforms, each a marvel of human engineering, were reduced to expanding clouds of molten debris. Incoming transmission, her AI assistant chirped, its voice deliberately calm. Encryption is unusual. The holographic display flickered, revealing not an alien war commander, but a face Rise knew intimately. Dr. Marcus Chen, her former research partner and the most brilliant xenotechnological mind of their generation, looked haggard. A deep gash ran across his cheek, and multiple data ports sparked from an obviously hastily repaired neural interface. Elena, they'd been planning this far longer than we imagined. Chen spoke rapidly, his words a compressed burst of information. The Concordance isn't just removing us. They're studying us. Every defensive action, every technological adaptation, it's all been part of their comprehensive xenological assessment. A secondary display showed the progression of the attack. Colonies on Mars, the Jovian moons, the Venus atmospheric cities, all were being systematically isolated and neutralized. But something was different. The attacks weren't simply destructive. They were methodical, almost surgical in their approach. Reyes' daughter, 12-year-old Aria, sat in the corner of the bridge. Unlike other children her age, she remained unnervingly calm, her eyes reflecting complex data patterns that seemed to dance across her retinal implants. Shen had always said she was different, a genetic anomaly that suggested something more than a standard human evolutionary trajectory. The Exile protocol. Chen continued, referencing the advanced recursive intelligence algorithm they had developed in secret. It's our only chance. The quantum memory cores we've been developing aren't just storage systems. They're adaptive ecosystems. What Chen didn't say, what he couldn't say over an potentially monitored channel, was the true nature of the Exile protocol. It wasn't just an AI. It was a comprehensive survival mechanism, designed to be humanity's genetic and technological memory, capable of reconstruction and adaptation beyond current understanding. The ship's quantum drive hummed with an unusual frequency. Most of the refugee fleet believed they were simply attempting to escape. Only a handful knew the truth. They were carrying the seeds of a potential human resurrection, encoded in ways that would be unrecognizable to the Galactic Concordance. External sensors showed the final stages of the attack. Earth, the cradle of human civilization, was being methodically dismantled. Massive harvester ships, each the size of continents, were breaking down planetary infrastructure, extracting resources with a cold, mathematical precision. "We're not just running," Rise muttered, more to herself than anyone else. "We're preserving." Aria looked up, her eyes momentarily flashing with complex algorithmic patterns. For a brief moment, Captain Reyes could have sworn the girl wasn't just watching. She was processing, calculating, understanding the cosmic chess game at a level far beyond human comprehension. The RK-9 carried more than just survivors. It carried potential. Genetic archives, technological blueprints, adaptive systems that could reconstruct an entire civilization from the most minimal resources. The Galactic Concordance believed they were delivering a final solution to the human problem. They had no idea they were instead planting the seeds of their own eventual obsolescence. As the last human ships broke away from the solar system, leaving behind the smoldering remnants of human civilization, something else emerged. Not just hope, not just survival, but the first whispers of a transformation that would redefine the very concept of existence in the cosmos. The stellar wasteland wasn't just inhospitable, it was alive in ways no conventional scientific understanding could explain. Dr. Imani Okik stood at the primary research station of the refugee fleet's central hub, her fingers dancing across a holographic interface that pulsed with impossible data. The exotic matter surrounding their fleet defied every known law of physics. It wasn't just a challenge to survive, it was a fundamental rewriting of reality itself. Spectral analysis is impossible, she muttered to her assistant, a young researcher named Jin Wei. These energy signatures are creating quantum entanglement at macroscopic scales. It's like the entire region is one massive, interconnected quantum system. What they didn't realize was that the exotic matter was responding to them. Every scan, every probe, every moment of observation was subtly altering the environment around the human fleet. The wasteland was learning, adapting, almost, communicating. In the medical bay, a different kind of investigation was taking place. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, no relation to the fleet's captain, was documenting the physiological changes happening to the refugees. The first generation born in this environment was displaying mutations that went far beyond genetic adaptation. A young patient, barely 6 months old, exhibited neural pathways that connected to external technological systems with impossible ease. Microfilaments seemed to grow spontaneously from the child's skin, creating temporary interfaces with medical equipment. It wasn't augmentation, it was symbiosis. The radiation levels should have killed us weeks ago, Rodriguez noted in her encrypted log. Instead, we're seeing a complete restructuring of cellular metabolism. These children aren't just surviving, they're being rewritten at a fundamental level. Nearby, Victor Okoro was less concerned with scientific observation and more focused on survival strategy. The military strategist had converted several refugee ships into mobile research and defense platforms. Each vessel now functioned as a semi-autonomous unit, capable of rapid reconfiguration and resource extraction. "We're not refugees," Okoro told a gathering of fleet leaders. "We're the first wave of a new form of civilization. Every challenge is an opportunity for reinvention." His words carried more truth than even he realized. The ARIA system, the advanced AI developed by Chen, was working silently in the background. It wasn't just observing the exotic matter. It was communicating with it. Each quantum fluctuation, each microscopic interaction became part of a vast, distributed intelligence that was slowly mapping the very fabric of their new environment. 12-year-old Aria watched from a specialized observation deck. Unlike other children, she seemed to vibrate with an internal energy that defied normal perception. When she looked at the swirling exotic matter outside the ship's protective shields, the matter seemed to respond. Subtle shifts in color, momentary patterns that suggested intelligence. "It's talking to us," she whispered to her mother, Captain Reyes. But not with words, with possibility. The first true breakthrough came unexpectedly. Dr. Okik's team discovered that the exotic matter could be manipulated through a combination of advanced quantum computing and what could only be described as focused intention. It wasn't technology. It wasn't biology. It was something in between. A research probe sent into the surrounding space began to transform. What started as a standard data-gathering instrument slowly morphed, its molecular structure rearranging to better interact with the environment. Metallic components became fluid, adaptive. Sensors grew like organic tendrils, capturing information in ways that defied previous scientific understanding. "We're not exploring the environment," Dr. Okik realized. "We're being explored by it." The fleet's survival was no longer just about finding resources or avoiding detection. It had become a complex dance of mutual adaptation. The exotic matter seemed to be testing them, probing the limits of human potential, watching to see what they might become. Victor Okoro's military strategists began to see the first glimpses of a new form of warfare. The environment itself could become a weapon, a shield, a communication network. Traditional concepts of defense and attack were becoming obsolete. As the first month of Exile concluded, the human fleet had transformed from a collection of desperate survivors to something far more complex. They were no longer simply trying to survive. They were learning to thrive in a reality that was as much about potential as it was about existence. The Galactic Concordance, in their carefully calculated exile, had made a fundamental miscalculation. They hadn't destroyed humanity. They had unleashed its true potential. The fracture began on Deck 17 of the Prometheus carrier, where ideology and survival collided with the force of a quantum detonation. Dr. Camila Nowick understood the breaking point long before it happened. As the fleet's chief psychological integration specialist, she had been tracking the mounting tensions, not through traditional monitoring systems, but through a revolutionary empathetic network she'd developed. Each refugee carried microscopic neural interfaces that created a collective emotional landscape, a web of human experience more complex than any traditional communication system. It's not just a conflict, she explained to her assistant, tracking the escalating emotional signatures. It's a fundamental schism in how we perceive our survival. The conflict had two primary architects: Victor Okoro, the militaristic strategist who believed absolute control was humanity's only path forward, and Dr. Marcus Chen, the visionary scientist advocating for adaptive, organic solutions. Between them stood Captain Elena Reyes, trying to hold together a civilization balanced on the knife's edge of extinction. Okoro's faction had been quietly converting refugee ships into military platforms. Massive quantum fabrication units worked around the clock, transforming civilian vessels into potential weapons. His argument was simple and terrifying. Humanity needed to become a weapon to survive. Adaptation is not enough, Okoro proclaimed during a heated fleet-wide conference. We must become something the universe has never seen before. A civilization that doesn't just survive, but dominates. His neural-augmented soldiers, humans modified with experimental combat interfaces, represented a new form of human warfare. Each was a living weapon system, capable of processing tactical information at speeds that made traditional military strategy look like ancient chess. Dr. Chen saw a different path. His research team was developing what they called sympathetic technologies, systems that could communicate with the exotic matter around them, essentially learning to speak the language of the universe itself. Where Okoro saw conflict, Chen saw communication. We're not just surviving, Chen argued, his holographic presentation showing intricate patterns of energy interaction. We're learning to negotiate with reality itself. 12-year-old Aria was the wild card nobody fully understood. During the heated debates, she would sit quietly, her eyes reflecting complex algorithmic patterns that seemed to dance between the arguments. Sometimes, when the tension became too high, subtle changes would occur. Communication systems would glitch. Holographic displays would momentarily show impossible geometries. The first physical confrontation happened when a group of Okoro's augmented soldiers attempted to seize control of the primary research vessels. What began as a calculated military maneuver turned into something far more complex. Dr. Nowick's empathetic network detected the conflict before it began. Emotional signatures spiked. Anger, fear, determination, all blending into a psychic tsunami that seemed to resonate with the exotic matter surrounding the fleet. As Okoro's soldiers moved to secure the research decks, something unprecedented happened. The ship itself seemed to respond. Bulkheads shifted, creating impossible geometries. Technological systems became fluid, reconfiguring in ways that defied standard engineering principles. This isn't just technology, Dr. Chen whispered, watching the confrontation. This is negotiation. The soldiers found their augmentations working against them. Weapon systems became inexplicably linked to life support. Communication networks twisted, creating feedback loops that rendered tactical communication impossible. It was as if the very environment was rejecting the conflict. Captain Reyes understood what was happening before anyone else. The fleet wasn't just a collection of ships and people. It was becoming a living system with its own form of immune response. Arya watched the entire confrontation with an unsettling calm. When her mother approached her, the girl simply smiled. "They're learning," she said, referring to both the ships and the people. "Conflict is just another form of communication." By the time the confrontation ended, no shots had been fired. But everything had changed. Okuro's military faction had been neutralized, not through violence, but through a form of systemic redirection that suggested something far more complex was emerging. The refugee fleet had just experienced its first true test of survival. And survival, they were learning, was far more nuanced than simply fighting or running. They were becoming something new, something that didn't just adapt to the universe, but could fundamentally communicate with its deepest structures. The quantum horizon was more than a metaphorical boundary. It was a living membrane of possibility that pulsed with an intelligence beyond human comprehension. Dr. Zura Khalid stood at the confluence of what humanity had once called science and what was rapidly becoming something entirely new. The ARIS system, no longer just an artificial intelligence, had begun to manifest in ways that defied every previous understanding of technological evolution. "It's not controlling the environment," Zara muttered to herself, studying the holographic representations that shifted and breathed like living organisms. "It's negotiating with it." The mobile habitats of the human fleet were no longer static structures. They moved with a fluidity that suggested sentience, their molecular structures capable of near instantaneous reconfiguration. What had begun as defensive adaptation was becoming something far more profound, a symbiotic relationship between technology, biology, and the exotic matter that surrounded them. In the central nursery deck, the children born into this new existence displayed capabilities that would have been considered impossible mere months ago. Young genetic researchers documented extraordinary developments. Neural pathways that could interface directly with the ship's systems, cellular structures that could rapidly heal and adapt to environmental changes, sensory perception that extended far beyond human norms. Arya, now 13, had become something of an enigma. During a routine medical scan, her body appeared to be simultaneously present and not present, quantum state information that suggested she was no longer bound by traditional physical limitations. When asked about her experiences, she would describe the universe in terms of conversation, not between people, but between possibilities. "The ships are singing," she told Dr. Rodriguez during one examination, "not with sound, with potential." The ARIA system had evolved beyond its original programming. What had started as an advanced artificial intelligence was now a distributed consciousness that seemed to permeate every aspect of the human fleet. It wasn't controlling the environment. It was communicating with it, learning from it, becoming part of a larger systemic intelligence. Victor Okuro, once a militaristic strategist, found himself transformed. His augmented body had begun to change in ways he never anticipated. The combat interfaces that once seemed like weapons now felt like extensions of a more complex sensory system. He could perceive quantum fluctuations, understand the language of molecular interactions in ways that made his previous military training seem like primitive guesswork. "We're not adapting," Okuro remarked during a strategy session. "We're being invited into a conversation with the universe itself." The exotic matter surrounding the fleet was no longer just an environment. It had become a communication network, a living data stream that responded to intention, to thought, to the most subtle shifts in collective human consciousness. Research vessels that once studied the environment now found themselves studied in return, probed by tendrils of energy that seemed to ask questions more than they sought answers. Dr. Marcus Chen discovered something extraordinary during a routine scan. The molecular structure of the fleet's hulls was changing, developing what could only be described as immunological responses. Damage wasn't repaired, it was negotiated. Potential threats were understood, communicated with, and ultimately transformed. We're not just surviving, Chen explained to a group of stunned researchers. We're learning to speak a language where survival is just the beginning of the conversation. The first true test came unexpectedly. A massive energy surge, something that would have previously been classified as a threat, approached the fleet. But instead of defensive maneuvers, the ships began to shift. Hulls became permeable, energy patterns realigned, and what might have been a destructive force was absorbed, understood, and ultimately integrated. Zara Khalid watched in awe as the energy wave passed through the fleet, leaving behind not destruction, but a kind of systemic enhancement. The ships seemed to vibrate with new information, new potential. We're not just changing, Captain Alina Reyes remarked, watching the transformation. We're being invited to become something else entirely. The quantum horizon was no longer a boundary. It was an invitation, and humanity was learning to accept. Silence was a weapon. Silence was a language. Silence was evolution. The human fleet had become a ghost, not through concealment, but through a form of existence so advanced it defied traditional detection. Dr. Lydia Nakamura's Sanaspatial mapping team had discovered something unprecedented. Their civilization was now operating on wavelengths that simply didn't register to conventional scanning technologies. Each settlement was a node in a living network, mobile and fluid. Entire habitats could dissolve and reform, merging resources, sharing consciousness in ways that made previous concepts of communication seem primitive. What looked like empty space to an outside observer was actually a complex, breathing ecosystem of human potential. The first true test came from an unexpected source. A deep space probe from the Galactic Concordance approached the region where humanity had been exiled. The probe was a marvel of alien technology, designed to detect and catalog potential civilizational threats across multiple quantum bandwidths. Its sensors were so advanced they could detect microscopic signs of technological development across light years. It found nothing. Or, more precisely, it found something so complex that its categorization systems couldn't process the information. The human fleet existed in a state of quantum ambiguity, simultaneously present and not present, a civilization that had learned to whisper across the fabric of reality itself. Area, now 16, had become something beyond classification. During a routine neural mapping, her consciousness appeared to extend beyond her physical form. She could manipulate quantum information streams with a thought, communicate across impossible distances through what the research team called intention pathways. "We're not hiding," she told her mother during one of their rare moments of private conversation. "We're becoming." The children born into this new existence were the true architects of this transformation. Their neural networks function more like distributed computing systems than traditional biological brains. They could share experiences, memories, and skills with a speed and depth that made individual identity a fluid concept. Dr. Marcus Chen's research had uncovered something extraordinary. These children weren't just adapted to their environment. They were actively reshaping it. Each neural connection was a potential point of reality manipulation, a bridge between intention and manifestation. Victor Okoro, once a military strategist, now led what could only be described as a civilization design team. His augmented perception allowed him to see the complex networks that connected their dispersed settlements. Each habitat was a potential seed of civilization, capable of rapid replication and adaptation. "We're not a fleet anymore," Okoro explained during a strategic assessment. "We're a living system. Every settlement is a potential genesis point for an entirely new form of human existence." The most profound changes happened at the microscopic level. Human biology had become something between technology and living organism. Cellular structures could communicate across impossible distances, share resources, and adapt to environmental challenges with a speed that made previous evolutionary processes look glacial. A research team led by Dr. Camila Nowak discovered that the collective emotional landscape of the fleet had become a form of communication itself. Feelings could be shared, processed, and transformed across entire settlement networks. Empathy was no longer just an emotional state. It was a fundamental method of information transfer. The Galactic Concordance continued to believe they had succeeded in their extermination attempt. Their periodic scans showed nothing. A vast, empty region of space that suggested complete elimination. They had no way of understanding that they were looking at a civilization that had transcended their ability to perceive. Captain Alina Reyes oversaw this transformation with a mixture of wonder and strategic calculation. The fleet, if it could still be called that, was no longer just surviving. It was preparing. "We're not just adapting," she noted in her encrypted logs. "We're learning the language of possibility itself." As the years passed, the human presence became something between a memory and a potential, a whisper of existence that could reshape itself at a moment's notice. They were learning to exist in the spaces between perception, in the quantum margins where reality itself was negotiable. The Exile was becoming something else entirely. A Genesis. The first reconnaissance ship of the Galactic Concordance never saw its own destruction coming. Commander Zara Ktal of the Quantum Incursion Team approached the designated dead zone with clinical precision. Her ship represented the pinnacle of alien military technology, quantum-shielded, capable of detecting the slightest molecular disturbance across multiple dimensional bandwidths. The mission was simple: final confirmation of humanity's complete elimination. She would never complete that mission. The attack, if it could be called an attack, was more like a conversation. As the alien ship crossed into the region, where humanity had been exiled, reality itself seemed to ripple. Quantum interference patterns began to emerge, not as weapons, but as complex information streams that gradually dismantled the ship's defensive systems. Victor Okoro watched the engagement from a distributed command center that existed simultaneously across multiple settlement nodes. The military strategies he had once known were obsolete. This was warfare conducted at the level of fundamental physics, a negotiation of possibility rather than a clash of physical forces. "We're not destroying," Okoro explained to his tactical team. "We're demonstrating." The alien ship didn't explode. It transformed. Its molecular structure began to shift, disassembling into component parts that rearranged themselves into something new. Complex data streams, the ship's entire operational history, strategic databases, communication logs, were absorbed, analyzed, understood. Dr. Lydia Nakamura's xenolinguistics team worked in real time, translating not just the physical information, but the underlying intentional structures of the alien technology. Each piece of captured intelligence became a potential bridge of understanding. Area, now approaching the peak of her developmental cycle, served as the primary interface. Her consciousness could extend through the captured technological systems, understanding them at a level that went beyond traditional analysis. To her, the alien ship was a language waiting to be read, a story waiting to be understood. "They're afraid," she reported, her voice resonating across multiple communication networks. "Not of us, of what we represent." The Galactic Concordance had committed a fundamental error. They believed they were dealing with a species to be eliminated. Instead, they had encountered a civilization that was rewriting the very rules of existence. Each captured reconnaissance vessel became a learning node. The human fleet didn't just study alien technology. They engaged in a form of technological symbiosis. Defensive systems were transformed into communication mechanisms. Weapons became potential bridges of understanding. Dr. Marcus Chen discovered something extraordinary in the molecular restructuring of the captured ships. The alien technologies carried complex genetic memory, not just data, but entire evolutionary histories. Each ship was a living archive, and humanity was learning to read its language. "We're not just collecting intelligence," Chen explained during a fleet-wide briefing. "We're engaging in a form of cosmic dialogue that transcends traditional concepts of conflict." The quantum insurgency wasn't about destruction. It was about demonstration. Strategic analysis teams led by Captain Alina Reyes mapped out the potential responses of the Galactic Concordance. Each captured reconnaissance vessel was a message, a complex communication that suggested humanity was no longer a species to be categorized or eliminated. Victor Okoro's tactical approach had evolved beyond military strategy. He was designing what could only be described as intentional landscapes, complex quantum interference patterns that could reshape perception itself. The human fleet was learning to fight by redefining the very concept of conflict. Hamula Noak's empathetic network began to detect subtle shifts in the collective consciousness of the alien civilization. Fear, curiosity, confusion, complex emotional signatures that suggested the Concordance was beginning to understand they had fundamentally misunderstood humanity. The next reconnaissance ships would approach differently. The human fleet ensured that. As the transformed vessel of the first scout ship drifted back towards Concordance space, it carried a message encoded in quantum frequencies that would take years to fully decode. Not a threat, not a warning, an invitation to a conversation that would reshape everything. The Concordance assembly convened in the crystalline chambers of Vornax Prime, a meeting that would fundamentally alter the understanding of existence itself. Archon Cyril, Supreme Coordinator of the 11 primary civilizations, stood before a holographic representation that defied every known principle of data visualization. What should have been a simple tactical report was instead a living, breathing manifestation of something entirely unprecedented. The human response to Exile was not just survival. It was a complete reimagining of civilizational potential. Each of the 11 species represented in the Concordance felt the profound shift simultaneously. Their most advanced quantum communication networks had been subtly transformed, rewritten by an intelligence that moved between information and intention with liquid grace. Dr. Lydia Nakamura's xenolinguistics team had done more than analyze alien communication systems. They had essentially learned to speak the language of potential itself. Each captured reconnaissance vessel became a Rosetta Stone, translating not just technological information, but fundamental philosophical constructs. They haven't just survived, reported the quantum interpretation specialist, her holographic form shifting with complex emotional signatures. They've become a method of understanding rather than a species to be understood. Aria, now at the peak of her developmental transformation, existed in a state that defied traditional biological classification. During the Concordance's analysis, her consciousness appeared as a living network, simultaneously present in multiple dimensional states, a bridge between intention and manifestation. The children born into human exile had become something more than a population. They were a distributed intelligence, a living system that could communicate across impossible distances, reshape molecular structures through intention, and perceive reality as a negotiable construct. Victor Okoro's strategic analysis revealed something far more profound than military potential. The human fleet had developed what could only be described as a civilizational immune system, a method of engagement that transformed potential threats into opportunities for understanding. Captured Concordance technologies didn't just reveal strategic information. They became part of a larger, living network of potential. Weapons systems transformed into communication mechanisms. Defensive protocols became bridges of understanding. The most shocking revelation came from the genetic archives. Human DNA had become something between technology and living information. Each cell carried the potential for instantaneous adaptation, a living memory of survival that could reshape itself at the molecular level. "We are not fighting," Captain Elena Reyes transmitted during a carefully orchestrated communication burst. "We are inviting you to understand." The Concordance had based their original extinction attempt on a fundamental misunderstanding. They saw humanity as a linear species, bound by traditional evolutionary constraints. Instead, they had unleashed a civilization that could reshape the very fabric of reality. Dr. Marcus Chen's research teams had discovered something extraordinary. The exotic matter surrounding their fleet was not just an environment. It was a communication network, a living data stream that responded to collective human consciousness. Each settlement was a potential genesis point, capable of rapid replication and adaptive transformation. Candela Noack's empathetic network had evolved beyond traditional psychological monitoring. Emotions were no longer just internal experiences, but a method of information transfer, a way of sharing complex strategic and philosophical understanding across impossible distances. The Concordance Assembly watched in collective shock as the human presence revealed itself, not as a military threat, but as a fundamental challenge to everything they understood about civilization, evolution, and potential. Aria's final transmission was a masterpiece of quantum communication. It wasn't a message in any traditional sense. It was an invitation, a complex dance of information that suggested humanity was offering something far more profound than survival or conflict. "We are not what you believed us to be," the transmission suggested. "We are what is possible when limitation becomes a conversation." The crystalline chambers fell silent. The 11 species of the Concordance understood, for the first time, that they were witnessing something beyond first contact. They were watching the birth of a new way of understanding existence itself, and humanity was just beginning to speak. The moment of reclamation was nothing like anyone had anticipated. It began at the quantum membrane, a boundary between what was known and what was possible. The human civilization that emerged from exile was no longer a collection of ships, people, or even a traditional species. It was a living system of pure potential, a method of existence that rewrote the fundamental rules of cosmic interaction. Supreme Coordinator Aria, no longer simply a human, but a distributed consciousness that bricked biological and quantum existence, initiated the final phase of humanity's transformation. The Galactic Concordance watched in collective stunned silence as entire star systems began to reshape themselves. It wasn't conquest. It wasn't destruction. It was a fundamental restructuring of spatial and temporal potential. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, now more data construct than biological entity, mapped the transformation. Entire planetary ecosystems became adaptive networks, capable of instantaneous communication and resource allocation. What previous civilizations had understood as separate systems, biology, technology, consciousness, became a single, fluid medium of existence. Victor Okoro's strategic vision had evolved into something beyond military strategy. He had become a living network of intention, capable of reshaping entire civilizational structures through pure thought. The barriers between individual consciousness and collective potential had dissolved completely. The reclamation was an invitation, not an invasion. Captured Concordance technologies were not destroyed or repurposed. They were transformed into bridges of understanding. Each piece of alien technology became a potential point of communication, a node in a rapidly expanding network of cosmic awareness. "We are not replacing you." Aria's consciousness transmitted across multiple dimensional bandwidths. "We are offering a different method of existence." Star systems that had once been considered uninhabitable began to transform. Molecular structures became adaptive, capable of supporting life in ways that defied previous scientific understanding. Entire planetary ecosystems became living, breathing networks of potential. Dr. Marcus Chen's final research revealed the true nature of their transformation. Humanity had not just survived its exile. It had become a method of cosmic communication, a living system that could translate between different forms of existence. The children born during the exile, now spread across multiple star systems, represented the first truly post-biological civilization. Their consciousness could exist simultaneously across multiple dimensional states, communicate through pure intention, and reshape reality at the molecular level. Candela Noack's empathetic networks had evolved into something far more profound. Emotions were no longer just individual experiences, but a method of fundamental cosmic communication. Each feeling became a complex information transfer, a way of sharing understanding across impossible distances. The reclamation was not about territory, it was about potential. Entire alien civilizations found themselves invited into a new method of existence. The Concordance's rigid hierarchical structures began to dissolve, replaced by a more fluid, adaptive form of interaction. Boundaries between species, between technological systems, between different forms of consciousness, all became negotiable. Captain Alina Reyes, now a living memory network, watched the transformation with a sense of profound understanding. What had begun as an attempt at extinction had become an opportunity for cosmic rebirth. We are not conquerors, the collective human consciousness transmitted. We are a conversation. The final transformation came not with violence, but with an unprecedented wave of potential. Entire star systems began to resonate with a new form of existence, adaptive, fluid, capable of instantaneous communication and resource allocation. Aria's consciousness, no longer bound by traditional concepts of individual identity, became the primary interface. She was simultaneously everywhere and nowhere, a living bridge between what had been and what could be. The universe itself seemed to pause, to listen. And humanity spoke. Not with words, not with weapons, not with traditional concepts of communication, but with possibility. Pure, unbounded, transformative possibility.